Hello, everybody. It's Andrea and Mr. Max, who has been barking so much that I am now hanging on to him for a little while until he calms down. I've got a lot I want to cover, so let me swing into it right away. I am recording this on March 25th, so you should be seeing and hearing it on March 26th. Max will add whatever commentary he feels is appropriate. For those who are just listening, Max is my mostly Chihuahua mix. He's very old and grumpy, and I adore him ridiculously, so he's just a part of my life. One of the things that's been really vexing me is the concept of the fifth columnist. Now, that goes back to 1936, when the nationalist Emilio Mola was heading for Madrid during the Spanish Civil War, and he said that he didn't just have 4 columns, he actually had 5 columns. He had a 5th column within Madrid itself, and by that he meant people embedded in the city. So he had saboteurs, and he had spies, and he had traitors. Nowadays, when we talk about 5th columnists, we mean people who are traitors, people who are within a country at war and who are not foreigners, so they're not like German spies embedded amongst Americans or whatever, but are actually just people whose allegiance is to the enemy. During World War II, that was a big issue. There were a lot of posters, and I collected some of them. There was the famous "Loose lips might sink ships," because they were warning people, and anybody could be listening. Quiet, again, loose lips can cost lives. And, I'm sort of peering around my phone because my setup isn't so great. Stop the 5th column, appreciate America, and it shows a saboteur who is the 5th columnist trying to push over the column of justice. And we also have equality and unity and liberty, so the saboteur is after it. And then the warning, don't fall for enemy propaganda against our government, against our allies, against Catholics, Jews, or Protestants. And remember that Hitler is trying to get Americans to fight amongst themselves. I've been thinking a lot about that because with the start of the war, we're getting a steady drumbeat within America against the war. Now, I should say war is sort of a technical term right here because there hasn't been an official declaration of war. Trump has operated within the rules of law, which allow him a time within which to engage in enemy action without a formal declaration of war. And there have actually been very few formal declarations of war. I know there was definitely one for World War II. The Korean War was a police action. I don't think the Vietnam War and really any of the other wars have been formally declared wars, but please correct me if I'm wrong, even if only in your own head and you don't let me know later. But we still are at war in terms of military action against a geopolitical enemy. So we're at war in the commonly accepted term. And yet I feel we have a lot of 5th columnists at home. And before I get to the nature of their 5th calumny, or maybe I mean 5th calumny, I have a picture up on the screen that I ask ChatGPT to make for me. And it shows the Union and Confederate armies at a battle, Chancellorsville or some battle, and they're dead on the field, and they're ragged, and there's a fog of war, and they're looking up at a B-2. It's a weird image, I admit, but what I've been trying to convey in the image is that Trump and Israel are fighting a war unlike any other war. And one of the things the naysayers are comparing it to other wars, to Vietnam, to the endless war of Vietnam, to the inability to fight an entrenched native enemy, to the Iraq and Afghanistan war, to all our past military failures. And they keep saying that Trump doesn't have a plan and Trump doesn't know what he's doing. What they're not paying attention to is the extraordinary nature of this war. This war started with checkmate. the nature of chess, and I'm really, really a lousy chess player. I haven't played it that often, and I always forget the moves the pieces can make. And in fact, a couple of months ago, I had a very fun evening with my children and my son-in-law, where we played in teams, and the guys, my son and my son-in-law who understand chess, made the intelligent move. My daughter and I kind of guessed. It was a challenge for the guys to play against chess idiots. But in any event, I know that the game ends when you are in a position to kill the other side's king. Checkmate. This war started with checkmate. No other war in the history of war has started with the king being killed on the first day of war. That is an enormous symbolic victory. And Israel and the United States since then have killed layer after layer below the king. Every time they appoint a new leader, gone. Everyone in the military, gone. They're just layer after layer. This is an extraordinary success story. They've also decimated the Navy. No, not decimated. That's 1/10. They've destroyed the Navy. The Navy's gone. They are wiping out military encampments, bases, missile launching areas, missile storages, everything. They are doing everything that in a conventional war wins a war. You wipe out the leaders, you wipe out the troops, you wipe out the weapons, you wipe out the storage facilities, and they've done it almost bloodlessly. It's extraordinary. Yes, there have been deaths. 7 military personnel died. Another, I think 6 or 7, and I'm not good at numbers, died doing a fueling run over Iraq. Israel has been hit, and people have died and been injured on Israel's sovereign territory. The mullahs are shooting out all over the Gulf. They've got as far as Turkey. They are fizzing like a firecracker burning out, but they have very little left. All that they have is the Strait of Hormuz, and the naysayers are insistent that Trump has absolutely no idea what's going on. But before I get to that, because I was spelling out the successes, Bret Stephens, a man about whom I feel pretty ambivalent, and I'll explain why when I get to my last Bret Stephens slide, wrote an opinion piece at the New York Times saying the war is going better than you think. Bret Stephens is the New York Times' one of their resident sort of conservatives, sort of like David French is a resident sort of conservative. And he, after discussing the fact that under Obama in 2012, fuel prices were way more expensive, and they've been way more expensive at other times than they are now. So, in fact, they were more expensive during the Bush era, Biden era. He wanted to talk about how well the war is doing. So he discussed fuel prices and how they're completely reasonable compared to the last couple of decades. Let's see what I got here, because I can't see my darn screen. I'm still fiddling with the technicalities. What can I say? I'm old. He says that ought to provide some perspective on the panic over the war in the Middle East. To hear the critics' versions of events, an unprovoked and unnecessary attack on Iran, launched at Israel's behest, is already a foreign policy fiasco that has put the global economy at risk without any clear objective or endgame. As Senator Chris Murphy, a Connecticut Democrat, told NBC's Christian Welker over the weekend, "We've never seen this level of incompetence and war-making in this country's history." He goes on to provide evidence of how well this war is going. I've just got 3 examples I'll quote. During the 1991 Operation Desert Storm against Iraq's Saddam Hussein, a campaign that is widely considered a brilliant military success. Do you want down, Mr. Max? Excuse me. The U.S.-led coalition lost 75 aircraft, 42 of them in combat. In this conflict, 4 manned aircraft have been destroyed, 3 to friendly fire and 1 in an accident. Not a single manned plane has yet been lost over Iran. The U.S. air and land campaign on that operation, meaning Operation Desert Storm, lasted a full 6 weeks. Today, it's remembered as a lightning-fast war. The current conflict with Iran is less than 4 weeks old. In the 1889 to 90 invasion of Panama, whose military phase lasted a few days, the United States lost 23 soldiers with 325 more wounded. So far in this war, U.S. losses are 13 dead. Among the more than 230 wounded, most have swiftly returned to duty. See, I'm still using paper in the background. I'm not that sophisticated, but it's really the only thing I can see because of my vision, which I mentioned in my first video slide, that my vision is kind of off the charts, so everything's a little bit of a struggle. Yet, I have perfect vision for driving. It's the reading and the transitioning between screen and paper and stuff that I struggle with. Here's why I'm not a fan of Bret Stephens. After saying all this, he could have just left it at that or said, yeah, I don't always agree with Trump, but he's doing a great job on this. This is really extraordinary. He has to add, I am not blind to the Trump administration's failures in planning, particularly its unwillingness to make a stronger public case for war and get more allies on our side before the campaign began. Well, I think that's a kind of quizzling thing to say because there's been extraordinary planning. There's no indication whatsoever that Trump and his military hadn't figured out that the Strait of Hormuz is a vulnerable point and that Iran would go after it. But they had a steady order of objectives. First, you wipe out the leadership, then you wipe out the military assets, and then you focus on the Strait of Hormuz. And he's done a very good job, as Bret Stephens notices at the opening, in keeping fuel prices well within the last 20 years. So all the panic about the Strait of Hormuz, yes, there are problems. I'm not blind to them, but it's ridiculous to pretend, as I think Bret Stephens does, that the Trump administration hadn't prepared for that. Making a stronger public case. He's been making a strong public case, as has everybody in his administration. It's been the media that's making it impossible to make the case. They won't replay it. They downplay it. They lie about it. That's not Trump. And finally, getting more allies on our side before the campaign began, as has become very clear, our traditional allies are not allies anymore. Allies stand at your side. What we have now are people in our governments in Europe that might help us out if they're not afraid that their Muslim populations will get back at them for daring to do so. So they're paying lip service or they're making strongly reworded opposing statements, but they're not going to do diddly squat. Israel is a strong ally because currently Israel and America have a common enemy. It doesn't mean they'll be strong allies forever, but in this, they're the two most advanced and intelligent militaries in the world, and they are fighting an enemy, Iran, that has stated explicitly its goal of destroying both of them. So, other allies, well, the Gulf nations are coming around. I have said for years that Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, I happen to like him. I am not blind to the fact that he is a Sunni Muslim. I'm not blind to the fact that he can be, if necessary, incredibly cruel in ways really incomprehensible to Americans. I'm not blind to the fact that he is an operator. I know all these things. He's also, I think, the most reforming person in the Muslim Middle East. He's forward-looking. I know that he's had back channels to Israel for a long time, although he, as the head of the Mecca Arabs, can never be open about that. I know he has a surprisingly good relationship with Jared Kushner. And he has now come out openly saying that the Gulf Muslims have to fight against Iran as an existential threat. So anyway, there you have the fact that Bret Stephens is a quisling, because after making a strong case for the war, then he had to do the ritual obeisance to the New York Times, and I think that's cowardly. I want to get to the obvious fifth columnists here. The day the war began, Jonathan Karl said, and Tucker Carlson has never denied, Jonathan Carlson said, Tucker Carlson tells me the attack on Iran is absolutely disgusting and evil. That is not someone supporting his nation in war. Also, at the New York Times, at the same time that Bret Stephens was showing that the war is going extremely well, we have Jamel Bowie, whatever, writing, "Trump cannot see that the opposition is real." I actually didn't read the whole essay. I think the first 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs tell the sort of story. If you can set aside both the unconstitutionality and the immorality of President Trump's unprovoked war on Iran, so it's immoral to attack an enemy that is working on a nuclear weapon to send to you and that has lied about its missile capabilities and that is pretty close to getting a ballistic missile that can reach the U.S. Doesn't matter if it can aim. If you use it as an EMP and explode it above the atmosphere, we're going to be pushed back to the 18th century. But it's unprovoked war and it's immoral. But if you set aside those things and focus on the operation itself, it is hard not to be bewildered by the utter lack of real planning or even basic strategic thinking that has gone into it. This is the most successful first phase of war in the history of the world, but hey, you go with it, Jamel. Neither Trump nor his aides, according to recent reporting, I didn't click the link. I'm pretty sure it's recent reportings from unnamed sources within the White House, probably Joe Kent's friends. Neither Trump nor his aides, according to recent reporting, planned for Iran to target shipping and close the Strait of Hormuz. They also do not seem to have planned for serious and sustained retaliation against America's Gulf state allies. They did not plan for an energy crisis and the potential disruption to the global economy, and they did not plan for America's European allies to, by and large, reject their call for support. Of course, they planned for all of that. You'll notice they didn't even notify the European allies about the attack because they knew that if they did, it would be leaked to Iran. They never considered them allies. The last of these 3 paragraphs, to read about the administration's decision-making process is to learn that it did not really plan for, expect much in the way of anything that now defines the war. This raises 2 obvious questions. What did they plan for, and what exactly did they expect to happen? This is the stupidest thing I have ever read, even in the New York Times, and that is saying a lot. The question is this treason? Well, it once would have been. In World War I, absolutely. In World War II, maybe. Nowadays, and I got this from ChatGPT, and I've read the case authorities and the law, so I know ChatGPT summarized it accurately. Speech alone no longer qualifies as treason. There must be overt acts, and there must be 2 witnesses to the same acts. In that regard, I'm going to interrupt myself. I actually had a video I wanted to include, which is a small but very real rally in Philadelphia, which is where the Declaration of Independence was signed, one of the most important places in American history. I'd like you to sit back and enjoy this man who seems to have an American accent, saying what he really thinks of the U.S. military and this war.
Until we have done everything in our power to bring the United States to its knees, let us not lose sight of the enemy. For every U.S. military base that crumbles, and for every U.S. soldier who returns home in a casket, we cheer! Hamas, Hezbollah, Ansarallah, all of the resistance forces we celebrate. These popular forces on the ground spend every waking moment in direct confrontation with Zionism, and they rely on a strong Iranian state to maintain their fighting capacity.
Do you hate America? May a Hamas rocket blow up your family's home.
Is that treason? Well, as I said, ChatGPT says speech doesn't count. You have to have overt acts. So putting it all together, writes ChatGPT, protected speech is criticizing a war, protesting the government, even praising an enemy in abstract terms. Unprotected speech, which can be, let me go to my next page. Unprotected speech, which is punishable, is directly inciting imminent violence, coordinating with enemies, or providing real assistance, speech tightly linked to criminal conduct, and that's being a spy, providing tactical info, stuff like that. And treason, which is very rare, requires aid to our enemies. In other words, nothing these people are doing is actionable under the law as it stands today. But honestly, some of it really ought to be, if not, I'm not a free speech absolutist, because you can't have absolute free speech. There have always been pockets of speech that are not free. Continuing my honored tradition of messing up, I stopped to give my dog his dinner. We're very rigid about doggy dinner here because he is diabetic, among other things. Diabetic, asthmatic, he has issues. And I paused the video and I forgot to unpause it. So I did a lot more talking. Nothing happened. We're trying again. What I was talking about was I cannot be a free speech absolutist, because that would be impossible. There's never been absolute free speech. We don't do pornography for children. I can't threaten to kill someone. I can't engage in actual planning of a crime. And all sorts of speech is not protected. But I believe in very broad free speech. The problem is that during a time of war, somehow there have to be some limitations, because a war is lost not only on the battlefield, but on the home front. Sherman's march through Georgia demoralized the home front. The home front had been really strongly supporting the war, the Confederates, despite everything. But once Sherman marched through Georgia, it was pretty much over. Just beating a path to the Atlantic, and that wiped out morale. Morale is incredibly, that's the word I'm looking for. Morale is incredibly important during wartime. And we now have a situation where we have major media figures doing their absolute best to destroy wartime morale during a hot war. And I find that very disturbing. I don't know how you counter it within the Constitution as it's understood now, and the rules as interpreted by the court. I don't want to go back to a Wilsonian World War I situation, which was almost fascistic in its clamping down on free speech. But we got a problem, and I have no idea how to fix it. This is a quick one. It is about something happening in Israel. If you're looking at the monitor, what you see is a video. You may recognize it. It is Yahya Sinwar in the last 10 seconds of his life before an Israeli drone sent him to hell where he belongs, because he was the mastermind of the October 7th massacre in Israel, a massacre of just unspeakable brutality. If you read anything about what was done to people on October 7th by the thousands of Gazans who crossed the border. So it wasn't just Hamas, it was Gazan civilians. The Stone Age torture they visited on the Israelis who were attending a music festival or living in their homes. So Yahya Sinwar deserved to die. But he should have died a long time before. He'd been in prison for a long time for other acts of terrorism that I believe involved killing people, and he should have been executed. But Israel doesn't have the death penalty. It wanted to prove that it was the non-Nazi country. The Bible has the death penalty, but Israel was a socialist country. It doesn't have the death penalty. So ever since Eichmann, nobody's been executed. And what this means is that terrorists roll into the prison system where they're treated very well. They get education, like Yahya Sinwar. They get cancer treatment. They hang around for a while, and then they can count on a prisoner exchange where they will then be released and go back to committing acts of terrorism. I think one study showed that something like 80% of them went back to being active terrorists. Israel is finally wising up to the fact that maybe this is not such a good idea. And the Mossad commentary is that the Knesset is finally considering, hasn't passed, but is considering a bill to execute convicted terrorists. It's subject to all sorts of anti-discriminatory and things and national standards and this and that. But the one best thing Israel can do for itself is kill the terrorists. These are fanatics. It likely will not act as to dissuade upcoming generations of fanatics, because that's not how they work. They're not rational. Rationalism says, if I'm going to be killed, if this carries the risk of death, and it's a very likely risk of death, maybe I don't want to do this, whatever this is. But terrorists don't think that way, Islamic terrorists. But you know what? They'll be one and done. They won't get a second bite at the apple the way Yahya Sinwar did. If you're watching, I call this segment in my own mind, Who Needs the 17th Amendment? The 17th Amendment, as most of you know, is the one that gave women the right to vote. And I have joked for quite a while when I look at leftist women, whether black or white, East Asian, Indian, Asian, whatever, I don't care. Leftist women, to me, are bat fecal matter crazy. They have jumped a million sharks. They live in a la-la land where America is a place of incredible oppression. But if they went to Gaza, free Palestine, and the Iranians are good, and any white man is bad, and men can be women, and women can be men, and they're completely crazy. They're totally overtaken by Trump derangement syndrome. They are completely destructive. They're not getting married. They're not having children, which, considering their mental state, is probably good, but they have checked out of normal society. And they constitute a huge and really the most dynamic part of the Democrat Party. They're drugged up on prescription drugs. They're deeply depressed. It has not been good for them. Feminism, they are sort of the products of third wave feminism, has been very, very bad for them. And I'm not saying they should be barefoot pregnant and in the kitchen, but I don't want them to vote. Now, I would actually give up my right to vote if all of them would stop voting. I would also give up my right to vote because I understand what women have always understood, which is that they are not powerless. And I know feminists are screaming at me, and I'm only sort of kidding about giving up my right to vote. I'm not yet ready to do it. But I belong to a conservative Facebook group, and there was a discussion in the Facebook group about Trump derangement syndrome and losing friends. And two comments stood out. There were a lot of comments. I didn't read all of them, but these jumped out at me because they were about children. Now, I adore my children. I'm very close to them, and they don't always agree with me on all things, but there's never even been the ghost of an idea that would mean severing the family relationship. So I found this actually kind of disturbing. One was my son-in-law told me I am no longer welcome in his home, and the reason, which I clipped because it was more personal, had to do with the son-in-law's wife kicking this person out. The other said, daughter-in-law took our son away a year ago for same reason, meaning Trump derangement syndrome. So this was two marriages where the woman drove the husband further to the left to the point of severing from his family. And it occurred to me that this is not the only example of women driving their husbands to do what I consider to be bad things. The very first was Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold was one of the Patriot Army's greatest generals. We might not have survived the early phases of the revolution were it not for him, but he was a difficult man, and he did not feel he was getting the credit he deserved, and General Gates was getting more credit, and Gates was a lousy general, and whole yada yada yada. I'm not totally clear on the details, so I'll be an idiot if I try to state them. And he fell in love with a beautiful Peggy Shippen, who was a loyalist. She persuaded him, and he was so disgruntled, he went with the persuasion. She persuaded him to turn over West Point, which was a very important shipping lane, to the British. And it was only because a spy was caught and the plans were revealed to the Patriots that this didn't happen. So Benedict Arnold, Peggy Shippen led him wrong and became anti-American. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton was more radical than he was, pushed him further left. Barack Obama, believe it or not, it seems that Michelle was the more radical and led him left. Paul Krugman, once a respected economist, Nobel Prize winning, became a crazy leftist after he married a leftist woman. Jake Tapper, once a fairly middle of the road, slightly left-leaning reporter, became an MS Now kind of reporter once, and I can't remember if he's on CNN or MS Now, but either way, he's very left. Colin Kaepernick, just a garden variety football player until his, I believe, Muslim wife or girlfriend turned him into a fanatic anti-American activist. Most recently, and I didn't include him in a collection of images on the screen if you're watching, but the theory is that Joe Kent was not as radical as he was until he married his current wife, who is a real leftist activist who hates Israel, which is Kent's new position, which is why he's found a loving home in Tucker Carlson's arms. So yeah, women, they don't need to vote to have enormous power over the political scene. Speaking of women, Zohran Mamdani's wife, Rama Duwadji, she's been in the news lately because it's been discovered that this American-born woman from Houston who calls herself a Syrian, which already tells you where her loyalties lie, is a absolutely extreme Israel and Jew hater. So, as I always say, you don't have to love Jews, you don't have to love Israel, you don't have to like Israel's policies. But if you consistently apply to Israel a standard you apply to no other nation, if you consistently apply to Jews standards you apply to no other people, if they are consistently your targets, and if your worldview is that every ill in the world, personally and nationally and globally, is the fault of Israel or the Jews, you've got a problem. And Rama Duwadji has a problem, and I think it's worth pointing out because it does make you wonder how much pillow talk is affecting what Zohran Mamdani is doing at home. So I have some quotes from an essay at the Free Press. This is an essay by, as I may have said, by Olivia Reingold. So in February 2024, a few months after the New York Times published an investigation into the sexual violence that occurred on October 2023, Rama Duwadji, the wife of Mayor Zohran Mamdani, liked an Instagram post that referred to the, quote, mass rape, close quote, hoax that was fabricated, that's a quote again, by the paper. That was just one of more than 70 Instagram posts uncovered by the Free Press in which the First Lady of New York City co-signed extreme positions against Israel. A sampling of the posts say Israel is waging a, quote, vile land grab, close quote, and the protesters who took over a Columbia University building in April 2024 were, quote, on the right side of progress, close quote. Another post liked by Duwadji, who identifies as Syrian but was born in Houston, Texas, calls for the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, which Mamdani has said he would honor if the Israeli leader steps foot in New York City on his watch. One post she liked referred to then-President Joe Biden as, quote, Butcher Biden, close quote, and said, quote, your legacy is genocide, Joe. Close quote. So much for Joe trying to pander to the anti-Israel vote. Continuing, earlier on Friday, reporting from Jewish Insider revealed that Mamdani's wife liked a post from October 7, 2023, and let me interject, that was the day of this massacre, celebrating the terrorist act as an act of, quote, collective liberation, close quote. As early as October 9, 2023, 2 weeks ahead of Israel's ground invasion into Gaza, Duwadji liked a post declaring, quote, Israel is committing a mass genocide as we type this, close quote. And then there's more about the virulently anti-Semitic sites that this woman follows. So the question is, where does the pillow talk go in Gracie Mansion right now? When Mamdani was running, he actually went to a progressive synagogue. But the thing to understand about progressive synagogues is that they hate Israel as much as any other leftist place does. Because leftist Jews are Jews in name only. They like, I always say that it's a skin suit. They like throwing around Yiddish words and they fast on Yom Kippur. But the Bible, meh. The Torah, meh. The rabbi commentaries, meh. The tradition, meh. They are all Marxist. And Marx hated Jews virulently. He may have been genetically Jewish. His father converted when he was 9 years old because of the anti-Jewish laws in Germany. And Marx's self-loathing was overwhelming. You cannot distinguish Marx writing from Hitler. Socialists hate Jews. Hitler hated Jews. the Soviets hated Jews, Stalin hated Jews, the American left hates Jews. You can speculate as to why. It's their association with capitalism, because in the Middle Ages, they were the only people allowed to loan money for interest, because the Christians then, as Muslims now do, interpret their holy text to say that usury or charging interest is evil. The Jews interpret it to mean that charging excessive interest is evil, but they understand that money is a commodity like anything else, and without loans, it's very hard to grow an economy, which is one of the reasons the Muslim world is stagnant. So Jews are associated with capitalism. They're associated with God, and Marxists hate God. They're associated with morality, and that's true even if they're not themselves moral, but the Bible is a moral book. They're associated with Israel, even when they live elsewhere, and Israel is an American ally, and Marxists hate Israel. So, yeah, you get the whole Megillah. Megillah, the whole scroll. You get the whole Megillah of Marxists absoluting hating Israel. So for Mamdani, just as a Marxist, he's going to hate Israel, but you have to wonder how much his wife matters. So he went to a progressive synagogue. That means nothing. But since then, since he's entered Gracie Mansion, my God, has he gone on an I am a big Muslim phase. February 6th, so very early in his term as first Muslim mayor of the city that lost thousands of people to an Islamic attack on 9/11. He says, I consider my own faith, Islam, a religion built upon a narrative of migration. What he doesn't mention is that the migration is through conquest. Yes, Islam migrated across North Africa, the entire Middle East, Central Europe, parts of Southern Europe, India. It migrated not in the spirit of just moving and growing and seeking new communities, but in the spirit of conquering through blood and sword and rape and slavery. Mamdani went on, the story of the Hijrah reminds us that Prophet Muhammad was a stranger too, who fled Mecca and was welcomed in Medina. And once in Medina, he had a falling out with the Jews and slaughtered them all. And that was the start of his baking into the Quran a religious mandate that Muslims must kill Jews. It's not optional. If you are actually a believing Muslim, you have a religious imperative to kill Jews, and many Muslims take that very seriously. So he goes on about how Islam is just all about lovely open borders, and it's true, it's lovely open borders if you are a Muslim bent on conquest. That was February 6th. February 9, there was a new Archbishop of New York. It's a huge ceremony. It's a big deal. For decades and decades, New York mayors have gone. Mamdani skipped it. So that was February 9. February 23rd, Mamdani joined Friday prayers in a mosque that preaches anti-American values and urges violence against Westerners and kafirs, non-Muslims. March 10th, he had at Gracie Mansion, he gave a dinner in honor of Mahmoud Khalil. This is a guy who claims to be a Palestinian. I believe he's an Egyptian. He's not American born. He was on the Columbia campus calling for death to Jews and Israel and everything. He is officially a spokesman for an organization that calls for the violent overthrow of America, which is a reason, if you are a formal affiliate of an organization preaching for the overthrow of America, the government does have a right to deport you. But when the Trump government tried to deport Mahmoud Khalil, leftist judges stepped in. And so here he is, still in America, and he's being treated at Gracie Mansion, this guy who calls for the violent and bloody overthrow of Israel, hates Jews, and belongs to an organization that wants the overthrow of America. But otherwise, it's all good. March 12th, Mamdani hosted an iftar, which is breaking of the fast program at City Hall. He invited all sorts of Muslim influencers there, many of them very radical, anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. March 17th, in the morning, and I don't have an image of this, he hosted a St. Patrick's breakfast, the traditional breakfast at Gracie Mansion, but apparently the food was inadequate and fell short of standards. I can't talk to that. But by later in the day, when he gave his official St. Patrick's speech, he used it to talk about the genocide in Gaza. So I don't think St. Patrick knew anything about that. By March 21st, he was at an Eid banquet for Muslim inmates at Rikers. And Rikers has the most violent criminals in the New York prison system. And there were a lot of Muslim inmates. It reminded me of what my cousin, a Jewish convert to Protestantism, who later became a prison chaplain, so there's an interesting story, used to say, and he said it very elegantly, and I forgot to look it up, but he said it's no hardship for a prisoner to convert to Islam because he doesn't have to make any moral changes or behavioral changes. Islam simply gives a religious gloss to his already violent impulses. But that's what my cousin says, and certainly there seem to be a lot of Muslims at Rikers. But also on March 21st, Mamdani was at an Eid al-Fitr breakfast prayer in Brooklyn. On the 23rd, WFUV News noted that the city's first Muslim mayor has zigzagged across the city throughout Ramadan, attending and hosting celebrations. And a little earlier on March 20th, I Meme, Therefore I Am, made such an interesting commentary. I will read this to you, and that will be the last thing before I sign off. Democrats fought hard to separate church and state, and this is true. You know, any hint that a politician believes in the Bible is verboten on the left, and you can only believe in the Bible if you're like Tallarico and you say that God is non-binary and created 6 sexes and wants abortion. That's the kind of Bible you can believe in, but otherwise no Bible. So anyway, let me go back. Democrats fought hard to separate church and state until the politician was Muslim and the church became a mosque. Now Mamdani openly references his Islamic faith and leadership, citing the Prophet Muhammad and Hijrah to frame policy, hosting Ramadan events at City Hall, and invoking religion when discussing migration, and many progressives applaud instead of objecting. Under their new standard, separation seems to apply only when the institution is a church and the leader is a Christian. When it involves a Muslim and a mosque, it is framed as diversity and inclusion, the rules for thee and not for me. Yeah, pretty much. I can't add to that. On that note, as always, thank you so much for listening. I'm grateful every time. It's just, I love to talk, and that anyone wants to listen to me at all is just an amazing and wonderful thing. So until next time, I'll be back. Maybe Mr. Max will be back. He is my charming, adorable baby. Thanks again.